And if you're in Darwin, you're in the home of a town that's named after Mr. Darwin, Charles. And if you wanted to know more about him, the concise story of an extraordinary man, then you would be able to attend a lecture or read a book. Tonight you could attend the lecture to save you do all that reading, and the man who wrote the book will be giving the lecture anyway. He joins me in the studio. Tim Berra, Professor thereof. Lovely to see you here.
Good to be here, Richard. This is my home away from home. I love being in Darwin.
It's an amazing thing because I look here at your little précis CV that you sent me. 3-time Fulbright Fellowship. That means you first came in 69.
That's right.
Came back in 79.
Right.
Came 2009.
Right.
Now 2 years ago. At least you're squeezing up, you know.
Well, and I've been here many other times. Those are just Fulbright grants, but I've been here I've lived 9 years in Australia over the last 40 years, chasing weird Australian fishes all over the place.
So it's the fish that bring you here. By the way, if you didn't know, he is an emeritus professor, evolution, ecology, and organismal biology. I know. I've already made that mistake. No, I deliberately made that mistake. Ohio State to the Northern Territory. It doesn't seem like a natural match.
Well, that's why I come here. We're too cold in the winter. I mean, we can get 20 below zero, and it doesn't matter whether it's Fahrenheit or Celsius. So I just love the heat of the tropics, and I'd rather be here than shoveling snow.
You are able to tell us about a couple of things today. First of all, tonight you are at the Malnan Auditorium. If you don't know where that is, it's at the Charles Darwin University, giving a free lecture about the man of which the town is named after, Charles Darwin, the concise story of an extraordinary man. How concise can that story be?
Well, if they sit quietly, I'll get through this lecture in about 75 minutes. So that's pretty concise. You could read a 1,200-page, 2-volume biography of Charles Darwin by Janet Brown, but what you're going to remember is what I've written in my little, about 115-page book, and then I'm going to extract from that for the lecture. So the audience can just sit back and relax. It's painless education. It's like having an audio book with pictures.
So the book that you wrote, which is the same title, The Concise Story of an Extraordinary Man, what made you want to write a biography, as I say, about a bloke who'd had more than one or two biographies written about him over the years?
Right. Well, as an evolutionary biologist, Darwin, of course, is my intellectual hero, and he has laid the basis of the foundation of all of biology, including medicine and agriculture and biotechnology, and I wanted it more accessible to the public. Plus, 2009 was the 200th anniversary of Darwin's birth, and there was a lot of activity around the world, including the Charles Darwin Symposium here in Darwin at the Darwin Convention Center with Chris Darwin in the audience, who is a great-great-grandson, and there I was giving the keynote address. So it all came together, and I'm going to be repeating that lecture tonight, more or less by popular demand.
I remember there's such a huge amount of conversation around that time when the big sort of Darwin Symposium was on. We obviously know a reasonable amount about his theories, and he comes under attack sort of, it's seemingly more and more these days. Is that because we know more and more, and therefore some of his early theories may be starting to get a little bit shaky?
No, I'd say it's just the opposite. It's because the public knows less and less. I mean, the nation, America, I think, seems to be dumbing down. If you listen to our politics, you can clearly see that. I was so glad to get away from all that, but then here I land in Australia and I hear the same nonsense.
Although in America it's a more pronounced experience because it's a very faith-based community.
Yes.
I mean, the population itself is hugely faith-based, and when you start to put Darwinism in amongst that really offends particularly people who are very strong in their faith.
People who have a literal interpretation of the Bible and want a 10,000-year-old earth and Adam and Eve and Noah's Ark and so forth, they have a difficult time accepting scientific evidence.
And therefore it gets taken out or gets changed in the curriculum, and you get creationism being brought into the curriculum. Well,
you get so much pressure put on high school teachers that they more or less avoid the subject, and so by the time they get to me in university, they really don't know very much.
It's extraordinary, really, that
it's sad.
Is it something that I mean, obviously you're a bit of a crusader for it.
Well, I've also written a book called Evolution and the Myth of Creationism, in which I explain what evolution is to the public. And this little book on Darwin is really not so much about evolution as it is about the life of Charles Darwin. What kind of a person was he? He was really a decent family man with 10 children and a wife, and devoted to his family, and I try and get a look at the personal side of Darwin.
It's hard to believe he made 10 children when he was sailing on the Beagle so much. I mean, he must have been a busy chap every time he came to shore.
After. He wasn't married at that point.
He just got off the ship and got stuck in.
Well, literally, not really.
What about one of the things that I noticed was that your book actually stirred a little bit of interest, not least of which was from the New York Times. You actually got reported in the New York Times because of a connection you made with a cousin of Charles Darwin and a notion of inbreeding for Charles Darwin.
Okay, now you're talking about a paper I wrote last year. We did a genetic analysis of inbreeding in the Darwin-Wedgwood families. You know, the Wedgwood family as in the pottery, the beautiful Wedgwood ware. Well, Charles Darwin married Emma Wedgwood, who was his first cousin. His mother was a Wedgwood. His grandfather and his grandmother were Wedgwoods. So the Darwins and the Wedgwoods are very much intertwined, and I calculated the coefficient of genetic variation and inbreeding within this line, and we basically concluded that it was a typical cousin marriage, and that there is just a very slight disadvantage to that. But we pointed up a couple interesting things. For example, he had 10 children, but 3 died in childhood before age 10.
It's suggesting that his theory of the evolution was probably not bad, because there was been some kind of DNA weakness in there.
Well, of course, he knew nothing about DNA. It hadn't been discovered. There was no knowledge of genetics at that time, but he did do many experiments on plant breeding, and he wrote 3 books about plant breeding, showing conclusively that cross-fertilized plants produce much more vigorous and healthy and numerous offspring than self-fertilized plants. And he worried, does that apply to my children? Why are they ill? What's going on here? And of his 3 children that died early, 2, we know the cause of death. It was bacterial infection. And from other studies, we know that susceptibility to bacterial infections can be a risk factor in consanguinity. And the other look at this is that he had 7 surviving children to adulthood. Of those 7, 6 had long-term marriages. Of those 6, 3 left no offspring. Again, unexplained infertility can be a hallmark of consanguinity. So did he have a reason to be worried about his consanguineous marriage to his first cousin? It looks like there is some suggestion that he was right on that.
These are the sorts of things that maybe you'll be able to take up if you go at 5:30 to the Malnan Auditorium at Charles Darwin University today and hear Professor Berra talk about the concise history of the man, Charles Darwin. He's my guest in the studio, 2:20 right across the territory. Just a little bit of update on the weather, and I should just give a warning for those people who are in the centre of Darwin. John just called from Virginia saying it's absolutely belting down just out at Virginia. Has been for about 5 or 10 minutes, and that the storms are definitely blowing their way. I'm just looking at the Bureau of Meteorology's radar, and certainly things are moving towards Darwin with a couple of reddish dots. So get those brollies out. Be prepared if you're in that part of the world. Tim Berra, the other thing that you've been up to, and you say you've got a fascination with fish, is that you've been following a particular fish, the nursery fish, and in fact you've just been down in around the Adelaide River. Now, am I right in saying this is the fish who carries his eggs on his head? Yeah,
that's right. It's got a hook. It's called a supraoccipital hook. Grows up out of the back of the skull, up over its forehead, and somehow the eggs get tangled around that hook. So the male carries them around like a bunch of grapes on his forehead. So he's very politically correct. He's doing his share of the caregiving here. And I've been working on this fish since 2001. And I can remember the first interview I gave with ABC back then. we got calls to the station thinking I was putting everybody on. There's no such fish. People called and said, I've been fishing out on the Adelaide River for 40 years, and I've never seen such a thing.
Yeah.
And, I've now been back 6 different times chasing this fish, and we're learning more and more and more. And
so it's not the Simpsons fish, the three-eyed one, it's a real one.
It's an honest-to-goodness fish. I got specimens. I got pictures.
What about that notion that one part of Australia provides such a richness in the biological sphere, so to speak?
Well, that's why I'm here. My main interest in evolution and biogeography is the geographical distribution of organisms, and Australia is so bizarre in everything. It's not just your mammals, the platypus and the marsupials. It's everything.
I love a monotreme. I always remember the monotremes.
Yes, the monotremes are bizarre, found nowhere else, Australia and New Guinea. But the fish are just as weird. And, there's not enough Australians studying these things, which in America there are ichthyologists like myself tripping all over each other. But I can come to Australia and work on new and weird things all the time. And so I've made my career studying weird Australians. And there are plenty of you.
I think the joke that Robin Williams told was about God being on, having too many drinks and putting the platypus together. I think I'll put a bill on the front, and then I'm going to make him look like a tail on the back.
Yeah, it's a weird animal, all right.
So the fish that you're talking about, that we're mentioning, the nursery fish, what would apart from it being odd, and I would imagine only found in a very small part of only this country, what does that do? What are the ripples that come out of that from the biology of that fish?
Well, when I started, we knew nothing about the biology of the fish. The most recent paper prior to my work was 1913, and nobody had done anything since then. And I started in 2001. We've now published 12 papers on this thing. We know what it eats, which is prawn and isopods and small fish. We know it has really unusual anatomy. I've done CAT scans of the body, and in fact, I have CAT scan movies that I'm going to show in my seminar that's coming up on Friday.
Well, that's right. You've got there are 2 lectures. You see,
that's right.
You're a multi-platform performer. There's no doubt about that.
I'm going to give good value for my dollar being here. I'll show some of these movies of the anatomy and the behavior of this fish, how it swims around. We've looked at its reproductive biology. We know that it spawns during the dry season, which is a very extended period, and it may spawn multiple times. I'm still trying to figure out how those eggs get on the male's head. There's no way of watching that happen. The Adelaide River is so turbid.
It's good to know that you've got a career that's going to be devoted. You've still got plenty of visits back to the Northern
I
Territory.
hope. The problem is getting support and finance to keep coming here. I can't keep doing this. I'm hoping to interest a couple of the local biologists in this animal. There's a new curator of fishes here at the NT Museum, Michael Hammer. And I want to take him out and sort of say, okay, Mike, here's a project for you.
Okay. Dr. Tim Berra is here. You can see him speak tonight, 5:30 at the Malnairn Auditorium. That's the one about Charles Darwin. You can see him again on the Friday the 28th. That's at 1 o'clock in a different room at the Blue 1.101. That's on the CDU campus. Basically, if you go to CDU and you look for blue buildings, you should be able to find your way there. That's the one that's about the nursery fish and avoiding crocodiles.
And I'm also giving that talk at the museum on the 9th of November at 12:30.
Okay, we've got, I think, and then basically he'll be on tour, basically playing rock and roll gigs, stadium tours. Dr. Tim, lovely to see you. Thanks so much for coming in, and I love the fact that you used consanguinity in your conversation.
Well, that's a new word for your magic story about words.
I love it. It's a great word, and I think we're going to put that towards Rowley Sussex. We're looking for good words today. Consanguinity. Thanks for coming in. Lovely to see you, and good luck with finding out more about those eggs on the